So I am David Hornik. I am a venture capitalist. That sounds a little bit like I'm in a support group, which is probably fair. It's interesting, those of you who saw the Google Ventures guys earlier, they talked about, we're creating a data platform to track and manage venture capital. And I have to say, for most of us in the venture business, it's like, wow, I can't wait to see how that works. When I joined the venture business a little over a decade ago, I remember coming back home after my very first partner meeting, and I said to my wife, so I've got bad news. I think I'm fucked. And she said, why is that, Dave? I said, well, everybody seems to know everything about everything, and I don't actually know anything about anything. I was an attorney, and she said, shouldn't you have thought about this before you became a VC? And I thought, well, that's a reasonable point. Now, 10 years later, I get it. It turns out that there's a huge amount of data in the venture business. It just turns out that it's all of the things that you're told over time by everybody with whom you interact, right? So every time I sit down with an entrepreneur and hear a pitch about something interesting, it's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about that particular way of distribution, et cetera. So, and so now, 10 years later, I feel like, okay, now at least I know a little bit about a lot of things, just enough to make me dangerous. So I'd say 6 years ago, I was being pitched by these guys that in a company that became known as Splunk. And Splunk was, they said, there's all this machine data out there. It's mind-blowing, and there's more and more of it. And if we could just harness that machine data, we'd learn a lot about what an enterprise is doing. The fumes of this system would be really valuable to figure out what's broken, what's working, how to make everything work right. And I said, wow, that's great. Can you do that? And they said, sure, we can do it. And so I funded them, a half dozen years ago to build this thing that became kind of a search engine for your machine data to figure out what was actually happening in your systems. And that was a moment in time when I started saying, oh, data, I get this data thing. Like, there are all these systems out there that are making these fumes, this exhaust, and if you could harness the exhaust to figure out interesting things, that would provide a bunch of value. So now, the thing that I think is interesting is one of those devices that's putting out a huge amount of exhaust, literally and figuratively, is the automobile. And so it turns out that we've looked at a number of companies that touch automobiles and the data that they're producing to determine that they're great things that can be built from cars and data. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of that. Our recent investment is a company called Relay Rides, which is this car sharing service. So you put your car on the service and then people can rent it out. And it makes a ton of sense, right? Because it turns out that cars are idle 92% of the time. And if you share one car, it takes 14 cars off the market. All that stuff makes a ton of sense. You can use the car you need, not just the car you have. So when you're going to Tahoe, you get the right car. But it turns out the data piece is all about insurance, right? How do you insure a bunch of people who aren't the car owner to use that particular car at a particular time? Well, if you know how they're driving and where they're driving and when they're driving, then you can insure them against particular risks at that point in time. And so only data that's coming off of the vehicle will enable and empower that. Another company that we invested in is a company called Inrix, and Inrix is the traffic data that we all have. Now, traffic data, it turns out, it was incredibly old school and stupid until Inrix and now others are working on it. It was all predictive. It was based on an incredibly small number of data points. And now, with Inrix, they have 10 million automobiles reporting in real-time data about what's happening on the roads. And not only are there 10 million vehicles in 30 countries, but it's not just reporting speed, right? So the old way is you drove over a sensor and you knew how fast a car was going. Well, now these cars are reporting whether their windshield wipers are on. Are they on high or are they on low? So suddenly you know that there is real precipitation. You're not guessing. You're not reading a report. They're telling you how fast the car is going and what temperature it is outside, so you can figure out if it's about to ice over. Telling you exactly where they go. So suddenly maps that didn't have some stupid little back road on it now are accurate. So all of these pieces are coming together to allow our cars of the future to say, hey, here's a route that actually is the right route for you today based on your driving activity, based on the cars that are on the road, based on the weather that's actually occurring, et cetera. So I'm extraordinarily excited about the power of data, and as I look at automobiles, I think that there's a big opportunity to continue to hack the way that we drive, the way that we buy, the way that we behave in these things that have become a real part of who we are and how we exist on the planet today. So that's my 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.